president has said that if any protesters are killed, there will be an American response.
We will take very strong action.
I tell the Iranian leaders, you better not start shooting because we'll start shooting too.
The end game is to win. I like winning.
By mid-January 2026, the global security order is cracking, and the world can feel it. Three explosive forces are colliding at once. America's consolidation of power after its intervention in Venezuela, a full-scale revolutionary uprising inside Iran, and a dramatic rearming of U.S. military doctrine under President Donald Trump's second administration. At the epicenter of this storm is Iran, where a collapsing regime faces a legitimacy crisis soaked in blood, with reports confirming more than 2,571 protesters killed in the streets. But now the crisis has reached a breaking point. On January 14th, the Iranian government is scheduled to execute 26-year-old protester Irfan Soltani, a single act that could trigger international war.
Well, now we're hearing that they're going to start hanging protesters tomorrow.
And that's going to be a lot of problems. When I see the kind of death is happening over there, we think. So we're going to get some accurate numbers and we'll act accordingly.
President Trump, emboldened by a decisive victory in Caracas, has issued a blunt and unmistakable ultimatum. If the hangings proceed, the United States will take very strong action. In that moment, Iran's revolutionary courts cease to be an internal matter and become a direct test of American power, credibility, and deterrence. A red line has been drawn, and if it's crossed, the response will not be diplomatic. It will be kinetic. To understand the real danger of a U.S. strike on Iran in 2026, you first have to understand what changed inside the Trump administration itself. What analysts are now calling Trump Doctrine 2.0 is no longer about deal-making or selective isolation. It is about restoring American deterrence through overwhelming, unapologetic force. And that shift became unmistakably clear in early January. On January 3rd, 2026, the strategic map of the Western Hemisphere was permanently rewritten by Operation Absolute Resolve. In a move without modern precedent, the United States deployed direct military power to capture a sitting head of state, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, along with his wife. Backed by the USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group and a new generation of autonomous and robotic warfare systems, U.S. forces achieved total battle space dominance within hours. Precision strikes crippled Venezuela's military command centers, including the Fuerte Tiuna complex and La Carlota Air Base, effectively decapitating the regime in a single night. The message was unmistakable. Sovereignty is no longer a shield. The success of this operation normalized regime decapitation as an acceptable tool of American power and created unstoppable momentum. When President Trump declared that the end game is to win, it wasn't rhetoric. It was a warning that this administration is operating with elevated risk tolerance, and that Iran may be the next test case. But while Washington projects raw strength, Iran is imploding from the inside. The Islamic Republic is now facing the most severe internal crisis in its entire existence. The protests of 2025 and 2026 are unlike anything Iran has ever seen. Deadlier, wider, and more relentless than every uprising before them. This is no longer unrest. This is a rupture between the state and its people. Human rights groups, using smuggled Starlink terminals to bypass total internet blackouts, have confirmed a staggering reality. As of mid-January 2026, at least 2,571 protesters have been killed. To put that into perspective, the 2009 Green Movement saw fewer than 150 deaths over 8 months. The infamous Bloody November of 2019 killed around 1,500 people in a single week. This time, the numbers keep climbing, and the regime is losing control. Iran's economy has completely collapsed. Inflation is out of control. The currency is nearly worthless after key infrastructure was physically destroyed during the 12-day war with Israel in June 2025. And now, President Trump's announcement of a brutal 25% tariff on any country doing business with Iran has severed the regime's final economic lifelines. Worse still, Tehran's failure to defend its most protected nuclear sites, Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan, shattered the myth of invincibility. The Iranian people have seen the truth. The IRGC's defenses are hollow, and once fear is gone, regimes fall. In geopolitical crises, systemic tensions often converge around a single individual or defining event. In January 2026, that focal point became Irfan Soltani, a 26-year-old resident of Fardis, arrested on January 8th during protests directed at Iran's supreme leader. What followed was not merely a legal proceeding, but a demonstration of institutional collapse. Soltani was detained, tried by a revolutionary court, sentenced and scheduled for execution in less than 1 week, without access to legal representation. The speed of the process underscored the erosion of judicial norms and the regime's increasing reliance on fear as a tool of control. President Trump's response transformed the case from an internal Iranian matter into an international flashpoint. Speaking publicly, he issued a direct warning: "We will take very strong action. If they do such a thing, hang protesters, we will take very strong action." With that statement, the fate of a single protester became intertwined with American strategic credibility. This created a classic credibility trap. If Iran proceeds with the execution and the United States fails to respond, the deterrent value of U.S. threats is fundamentally weakened. Yet for Tehran, reversing course carries its own existential risk. Backing down under foreign pressure could signal weakness, embolden protesters, and accelerate revolutionary momentum. The result is a security dilemma in its purest form, one in which restraint by either side is perceived as loss, and escalation becomes the rational if dangerous choice. One of the most striking anomalies in the strategic landscape of January 2026 is the posture of U.S. naval power. For the first time in years, there is a confirmed carrier gap in the Middle East. No U.S. carrier strike group is operating directly inside the Persian Gulf. Instead, American naval power is deliberately dispersed. The USS Gerald R. Ford is positioned in the Atlantic, supporting operations linked to Venezuela. The USS Abraham Lincoln is deployed to the South China Sea, reinforcing deterrence against China. The USS Harry S. Truman remains in the Red Sea, separated from Iran by the Arabian Peninsula. This absence is not a sign of disengagement, but of adaptation. By keeping carriers out of the confined waters of the Gulf, the United States reduces exposure to Iran's asymmetric naval doctrine, particularly swarm attacks using fast boats, mines, and anti-ship missiles. Rather than concentrating power in vulnerable choke points, Washington appears to be postured for long-range, standoff warfare. Strike options include Tomahawk land attack missiles launched from surface ships and submarines in the Red Sea and Indian Ocean, land-based air power operating from U.S. facilities in Qatar and the United Arab Emirates, and global strike bombers such as the B-2 and the emerging B-21, capable of flying directly from the continental United States. Alongside these conventional options, the administration has repeatedly alluded to the existence of undisclosed cyber capabilities. These references are widely interpreted as modern equivalents of past contingency programs designed to disable air defenses, communications, and command networks before the first kinetic strike occurs. Taken together, the posture suggests a deliberate strategy: avoid visible escalation while quietly assembling the ability to strike Iran with speed, precision, and minimal warning. The carrier gap, rather than signaling restraint, may instead reflect preparation for a very different kind of war. When analysts synthesize the so-called Maduro precedent, the widening carrier gap, and the catalytic impact of Irfan Soltani's execution, three distinct operational pathways come into focus. each representing a different rung on the ladder of escalation. The first is a punitive snapback strike, a tightly constrained use of force designed not to topple the regime, but to send an unmistakable message. In this scenario, precision cruise missiles would strike symbolic and operational pillars of repression. Revolutionary court complexes, detention centers such as Evin and Gohardasht, and Basij command nodes, while deliberately avoiding the risks inherent to manned air operations. It would be punishment, not invasion. The second pathway is far more decisive. A decapitation strike, modeled on the United States intervention in Venezuela, would aim to collapse the system from the top down. Stealth bombers, armed with massive ordnance penetrators, would target hardened leadership sites, IRGC command bunkers, and the Supreme Leader's inner compounds, while synchronized cyber operations sever communications and paralyze command and control. The objective would be simple and brutal: remove the head and let the body fall. The third scenario abandons kinetic force altogether in favor of economic warfare. Economic strangulation would see the full enforcement of a 25% global tariff regime, potentially reinforced by selective naval blockades. The intent would be to cut off revenue flows so rapidly and completely that the regime's financial system collapses under its own weight, bankrupting the state without firing a shot. Together, these three options outline the strategic menu confronting policymakers: punishment, collapse, or suffocation. Each carries profound consequences, not only for Iran, but for the global order watching closely from the sidelines. A defining characteristic of the 2026 crisis is a shift that would have been unthinkable just years earlier: the open convergence between the United States government and Iran's organized opposition in exile. At the center of this alignment stands Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi. From abroad, Pahlavi has called on Washington to intervene sooner, reviving the long-dormant idea of a National Transition Council.
It is the Iran that existed before the Islamic Republic, and it is the Iran that will rise again from its ashes the day the Islamic Republic falls.
A parallel authority designed to step in the moment the Islamic Republic collapses. Behind closed doors, Trump administration officials have confirmed sustained contact with opposition figures. Publicly, the language has been carefully calibrated, but unmistakable. When senior U.S. voices declare that help is on the way, few doubt the implication. Washington is signaling recognition of the Transition Council as the legitimate representative of the Iranian people. The strategy closely mirrors the Venezuela template, where military force is framed not as invasion, but as enforcement, support for a lawful government in waiting against an illegitimate regime. At the same time, a cold assessment of Iran's retaliatory capacity in January 2026 reveals a nation operating from a position of weakness. The June 2025 conflict inflicted severe damage on Iran's ballistic missile reserves and laid bare the limits of its so-called Ring of Fire. Hezbollah and Hamas, once portrayed as decisive deterrents, failed to alter the strategic calculus of determined adversaries. While the Houthis in Yemen retain the ability to disrupt Red Sea shipping, and the specter of a nuclear breakout remains an ever-present risk, Iran's conventional naval forces and remaining missile infrastructure are increasingly exposed. The catalytic shock of the Sultani execution that dramatically raises the probability of U.S. military action. If it comes, it is unlikely to resemble the wars of the past. There will be no mass land invasion, no columns of armored divisions. Instead, the campaign would be precise, air-centric, and ruthless in focus, designed to decapitate the regime's leadership and clear the path for an opposition takeover. An era may be ending, replaced by a strategy not of patience, but of enforced transition.